And now we continue with Cristian Branea from Romania with his presentation on environmental justice and the case of Rosia Montana.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here. I would like to start Thank you for having me here. I would like to start because it's Saturday and I'm trying to be informative but kind of entertaining as well. I would like to start by showing two very short clips which are made by a small advertising agency in Bucharest, which is connected with the environmental movement, Rosia Montana environmental movement. And I'm going to talk then after we see these clips, after Rosia Montana case, which I think is very similar with what happens here in Greece, in Politiki, if it's pronounced correct. So I need to warn you, these clips are kind of graphic and they might be a little bit difficult to watch. Yes, let's hope this works. And then the same message, just a different execution.
Salut! Sunt Dragoș Bucur și mă aflu aici pentru a face o donație celor care încearcă să extragă tot aurul nostru. Tot aurul meu. Sper să fie de ajuns.
I would like to say a few words about this image that you see at the end, the huge crater. I need to stop this. So the huge crater is actually very close to Rosia Montana. It's the copper mine in Rosia Poieni, and I have some other pictures. This is also Rosia Poieni. It's just across the hill from Rosia Montana, and we have one example of good mining practices. This used to be a village, and what you can see now is only the church, which is still standing. The church is actually 100 meters above the village. The village is all sinked into this toxic waste. Here you can see this, the same church. You can see the cemeteries that were still up on the hill. So this is just across the mountain from Roșia Montană, and of course this is the quarry. They do not take out of this. Is just a copper mine. And this is a picture of how Roșia Montană actually looks like. What you see down in the valley is the small town, the small village of Roșia Montană, and this is how it looks. So going back, even though in this program you can see that I belong to the Romanian Green Party, I would like to talk as a PhD candidate because this is a piece of my academic research, but I was trying to make it more user-friendly, so I'm hoping that I'm not going to use a lot of academic words. So I'm going to talk about the environmental justice as a framework for mobilization against populist politics in post-communist Romania, the case of Save Roșia Montană campaign. This is a map of Romania, and you can see also Bulgaria down south, and where Roșia Montană is located, very close to Cluj-Napoca, which is one of the major cities in Transylvania, and one site, important site for the green activism in Romania. A few words about this mining project, because this is what started everything. This is actually what started the most significant or the most important environmental movement in Romania after the fall of the communist regime. So Roșia Montană is located in the Golden Quadrilateral, which is the biggest known European gold and silver deposits. So the project is going to build the European biggest cyanide-based open-pit gold and silver mine project. So we are going to have the biggest project in Europe if this starts. The developer or the proponent of this project is Roșia Montană Gold Corporation. And behind this corporation is, of course, Gabriel Resources, which is a Canadian junior company that owns 80% of the shares. The gold it's estimated at 300 tons, and the silver 1,628 tons of silver. The medium content is 1 gram of gold and 7 grams of silver for every single ton of rock. So you can imagine it's just a few remains of gold in the mountain. So in order to make a very small ring, you actually need to displace several tons of rock, to grind it very, very finely until it looks like flour, and then bleach it, let's say, with cyanide and take the gold and the silver out of it. The technology is going to be based on cyanide leaching technology, and the lifespan of the project should last no more than 16 years. And this is important because there are also alternatives for a more sustainable development than just this sudden boom of economic growth that will only last for 16 years and will leave the whole area damaged. Now, what's special about Roșia Montană is the fact that it has a significant cultural importance for Romania. And why is that? First of all, there is a local community which actually really sits on this deposit of gold. So the mine will be located in the town. The region is inhabited. There are hundreds of families living there that have to be relocated and resettled, and this project, this process started already, and I think that more than probably 200 or 300 families have already been relocated or resettled to a different community, to a different place. But there are also several protected natural areas and protected species. It's one of the sites with the greatest abundance of cultural heritage resources of all Romania. It has 50 listed historical monuments in a territory of roughly 600 hectares, and 7 of them are designated as Monument of National and Universal Values. Roșia Montană is also the oldest documented mining settlement, which it is known as Albunus Maior since the Roman times. In Roșia Montană have been discovered 25 Roman waxed tablets, which is dated in the 1st century, and they are considered to be the birth certificate of the Romanian nation, and it's also a unique source for the research on Romanian law. These tablets actually contain mining contracts dated from the Roman times. At the deepest level, we have one of the most important cultural objectives, let's say, in Roșia Montană are the Roman mines, which are perfectly conserved. There are hundreds of kilometers which are unique in all Europe. If the project will start, all these are going to be simply destroyed, because most of the gold is actually in the mountain where the mines are. So the cultural significance of Roșia Montană is largely recognized nationally but internationally as well, and publicly stated as an unprecedented number of groups, institutions, organizations, and professionals, like the Romanian Academy, the International Council on Monuments and Sites, which is the advisory board of UNESCO on the assessment of cultural properties nominated for the World Heritage List, the International Union of Architects, Europa Nostra, together with more than 1,000 scientists or cultural institutions. So this is just to have a little bit more background of what Roșia Montană is about, because it's not just about gold being under the ground. So the state Roșia Montană became the biggest and the most important environmental or social movement in post-communist Romania. It spans now for more than a decade. It started with a local opposition that took place at the beginning of the year 2000 in Roșia Montană. The organization Roșia Montană was founded in 2002 to represent the interest of 300 families living in Roșia Montană against the Gabriel resources. Most of these families in the meantime just moved. So now Adus Mayos, I think, represents maybe around 100 or even less families who are still there and do not want to sell their properties and move. In time, over this decade, other actors joined this social Save Roșia Montană movement, international non-government organizations, national NGOs and coalitions of NGOs, grassroots groups, workers' union, academic bodies like the Romanian Academy of Science and several universities in Cluj, Alba Iulia and Bucharest, professional bodies like the Union of Romanian Architects, churches. We have, for example, the first ever environmental theology position, which was signed by the Romanian Orthodox Church. It was the first and the only one since then. Artists, sport clubs, and football supporters, and you don't want to mess with the football supporters. So this is truly a social movement. It's more than just a bunch of NGOs doing work. It's really these NGOs actually managed to get a public mobilization which is nationwide and also has an international dimension. So that's why sometimes we talk about this movement as a global movement. It's a combination of global and local. And this is due to a cross-border impact of the project. If something goes wrong, everything will go to Hungary first, and then across the river Danube to the Black Sea. So there are many countries that could be potentially affected, and we have the example of the cyanide spill in 2000 in Baia Mare, and we still haven't paid the bill to Hungary for that. And there are also this local movement. It also has to do with the scale of the policy making, which involve local, national, regional, European, or even international bodies, for example, UNESCO and the UN ESPO Convention Committee. Now a few words about my research. So, because as I told you, this is a very, let's say, a small slice of what I'm doing for my PhD project, which is focused on Roșia Montană environmental movement. I would like to explore the conditions and strategies for successful environmental activism in Romania that aims at contesting environmental, unsustainable, and potentially harmful development practices, but also underlying political processes like corruption, populism, lack of transparency and participation, and underlying social processes like poverty and employment. So basically what I'm trying to say is that these unsustainable practices have these causes which are social and political. But I would also like to contribute to an emerging effort to explore the promises, challenges and limits of environmental justice, both as a frame for popular mobilizations against environmental degradation, but also as a set of principles for analytical interpretation. So environmental justice is also a theoretical concept that it's useful to explain what the movement is all about. I have some research hypotheses. The first one is, and I think this is one of the most important, that saying Roșia-Montană movement can be understood or described in terms of environmental justice movement, although it never explicitly assumes itself as such, because it doesn't have the language to describe itself as an environmental justice movement. But it resembles a lot with the environmental justice movement that take place in other parts of the world, for example in South America or Africa. Another hypothesis is that as an environmental justice movement, it articulates a very rich and pluralistic concept of justice that goes beyond the distributive equation of resources and risks to include issues such as recognition and participation, but also implies a preoccupation with justice toward the future generation. The third hypothesis also says that this environmental conflict of Roșia-Montană is a valuation conflict. It's a conflict of incompatible versions of environmentalism, because strangely enough the corporation also claims an environmental discourse, which is of course very different from the discourse of the movement itself. The fourth hypothesis is that this movement contributes to the democratization processes in Romania. It acts as a watchdog against corruption, populism, institutional abuse and malfunction, and freedom of press. And the last one, the last hypothesis that I have, is that this movement articulates alternative discourses to the dominant neoliberal politics of development. This is some information about my study, about my methodology. I'm going to go over it. It's not so important for this presentation. Here are some of the key concepts of my research. First of all, is political ecology, environmental justice, ecological distribution conflict, valuation and the incommensurability of values, and democratization. So these are the 5 most important concepts for my research, and I think they are also very useful in my presentation today. Now a few words about political ecology, because we heard some things about political ecology in this conference, and I think we're going to have to listen some more. I'm using political ecology as an approach to inform my methods of research. One of the things that political ecology would say is that environmental conflicts and ecological political contentions appear and grow as consequences of ecological development. So basically, you try to explain these environmental conflicts as embedded in social and political situations. At the most general level, the collapse of the socialist bloc in 1989 and the restructuring of the global capitalism, the rapid expansion and deepening reach of international capital results in an overall environmental changes and damages. This framework of political ecology will help me explain how the environmental justice is produced, the environmental injustice is produced, and how the movement reacts to this injustice and grows as a response to this injustice. The conditions and the origins of this conflict, and the way in which the conflict is politically and socially molded, but also the way in which these political processes generate and shape material conditions. So the outcomes of this struggle are modeled by, are influenced by this, the political decision and the social situations. So this approach helps analyze the phenomenon and the causes of environmental injustice, which are embedded in social, political, and economic structures. It is capable of observing environmental injustice almost everywhere that environmental problems occurs. When approached from this perspective, environmental justice is able to provide clues to finding the social and political consequences of connections between local, regional, and international impact of the gold mine, national and international environmental policies and regulations, community, environmental movement, and the state. So this approach really helped me analyze all these aspects of this environmental conflict. Now I would like to say a few words, so going into the data, a few words about how do we identify this concept of justice in what the movements actually put forward in the last 10 years. And I'm going to use the 3 concepts that usually are described in political theory of justice, the distribution aspects, the recognitions, and participation. So first of all, one of the most important is the distributional aspect of the environmental justice, which have to do with unfair distribution of economic goods versus environmental bads. So, to put it simply, it's an issue of who gets the goods and who lives with a bad, or with a pollution in this case. There are several kind of discourses around this issue of distribution. For example, this is framed in terms of developed world versus developing world, transnational corporations or transnational capitals versus impoverished local rural community, resource grabbing by foreign corporations versus a slow-paced sustainable development, which involve agritourism and valorization of cultural patrimony and small farming. It also involves the dispute of the predicted economic and financial gains that the local community of the Romanian state will have. For example, the state participation in the project, which is 90%, but actually it's even lower now. Low royalties, fewer places, and even fewer available for the local versus the expat that will have to work in the mine. It also has an international aspect in terms of short benefits for now, or we are looking for long-term benefits in the future in the interest of the future generations. And of course, the disproportionate resources that are unfair and leads to a scenario of the battle between a David and a Goliath. And we know it from the Bible. The second aspect is the aspect of recognition. This involves a focus on local community and their cultural identity. And the Roșia Montană is located in what it is called Țara Moților. Țara is county or country or land, which is an ethnographical region, and the local people are known as Moți. The region has a long history of fighting for political, economical, and social rights, with movements such as the revolt of Horia Crișan and the Romanian part of the revolution in 1848 having their origins here. Moții, these local people are said to be very proud, dignified, and self-determined people. And this cultural identity is played heavily on this movement. For example, in Fest, which is in English would be Hayfest, which is taking place in Roșia Montană every year. I think this year will be at the 8th edition. It's probably the first and the only activist festival where people are going there and camping and having concerts, and I think pretty much what's happening today in Hadiki, the concert there. So this aspect of recognition is very important. It's using a lot of the cultural identity of the people living there. And what you see there is one of the most famous activists. His name is Eugen David. He's actually the president of the local grassroots organization Albunus Maior. And if I have to translate what's on the top of the picture, it's "You shall not pass with cyanide." It sounds better in Romanian than in English. The aspect of participation is actually one of the most important in this movement. And this participation, which is the procedural aspect of justice, or of environmental justice, has been extremely important for this particular movement, and arguably one of the most successful so far. It requires public participation in public decision making. And to quote for one of the public releases of the Albunus Maior organization, it means to use all civic and legal means to ensure that the licensing procedure for Roșia Montană mining projects comply with all relevant legislation on environmental impact assessment, on the authorization of construction work, protection of cultural patrimony, as well as fully comply with the public rights for access to information, public participation, and access to justice. So the three main strategies of involvement, of public involvement in this movement, has three aspects. One is access to information, access to justice, and public participation. Here are a few details about what each of these aspects means and how they are translated in actual actions that the movement did. The access to information. So during the last 10 years of activities, they have produced over 2,000 requests for information from Romanian authorities based on a law of free access to public information. but also additional requests sent to other non-Romanian institutions such as the European Parliament, the European Commission, the government of Canada, and also a number of private and financial institutions. The access to justice, which was probably the strategy that actually managed to put the project on hold and stop it for many years, and it's still in this waiting phase at this moment. The strategic litigation, which started in 2003, and which was always against state institutions, and resulted in the annulment of permits, archaeological discharge certificates, and urban zoning plans, some of the most important documentation that the company need to obtain the environmental permits and permit from the Ministry of Culture to go ahead with the construction of the mine. They still don't have them at this moment. The authorities are keep reissuing these papers, and then the movement actors just go to trial again and again, and they ultimately just win. For example, this environmental assessment procedure, this environmental impact assessment procedure has been contested at the Compliance Committee of the UN Aarhus Convention on access to information, public participation in decision making, and access to justice in environmental matters. So as I said, this was the most successful strategy in delaying or stopping the permitting procedure, but also in revealing the illegal aspects of the mining project and the need for a political resolutions that will move the plan ahead despite these legal aspects. And this is an important issue when I'm going to talk about this populist dimension, the populist response to this movement, who is actually contesting the fight for a political decision on the side of the company and their supporters, including President Băsescu. A few examples of participation in policy making. I'm not sure how much time do I have. So I'm trying to get to the discussion of the responses, the populist responses to this movement. And what you see, I'm not sure if you recognize the guy here who has been poured in gold. This is the President of Romania, Mr. Traian Băsescu. This is one of the images which is produced by the movement and have been used a lot of in public demonstrations. It's a really interesting and kind of funny pun. In Romania it really sounds funny. Lingo, it means gold bar, you know, this gold bar that is a company would produce, but it also sounds very similar with kiss ass or a brown nose. So it's a play of words. It means you gold bar and you kiss ass with brown nose. So why is this? Because President Băsescu has been one of the most important and significant proponents and supporters of this project, despite all the fight on behalf of the movement. So I'm going to refer to this main populist actor, Traian Băsescu, the president of Romania. He came to power in the year 2004, riding a wave of resentful populism. His slogan was "Get the corrupt." That was the main discourse for his campaign when he actually won the elections. And he kind of proposed an image of a kind of Robin Hood that fights the establishment and the generalized corruption of political elites. And he has this discourse in terms of them, which are of course the politician versus the people who are just fed up with these corrupt creatures. He gained popularity fighting the entire world pretty much soon after he got elected, but during his campaign. He fought with his early prime minister, who was a liberal. They actually have an alliance before the elections. So the liberal got to have the prime minister, but actually start fighting quite soon after the elections. And for the most of his time of being in power, he actually had another prime minister who was coming from his political party. He was pretty much just like a spokesperson for him because he was making all the decisions. So we have this image of a president who is in charge of everything and leading and taking all the important governmental decisions. But he was also fighting the parliament. He was fighting even his own party, who was criticized for being unable to grow and become the submissive presidential party that Zeus wanted. Zeus is how is called. because he's a very macho figure who wants to rule the party and everything. So he's the main political actor that aggressively promoted the mining project. And of course he became a very strong target for the movement because of that. But also the discourse has been constructed as a response to the discourses that the movement put forward, because the movement has started to gain more popular recognitions, and the people, the poorly said that people do not approve of this project because the use of cyanide, and recent history with the cyanide spill in Myanmar, which was still very fresh in people's mind. But also he was accused for lobbying for gathering resources, so therefore for private interest. He has been accused of corruptions and having his own private interest in this business. So what we have here, there are a few ways of framing his populist support of gold mining. So you can imagine that after this, the social movement actually took off and become a nationwide, and they have access to communication and the internet, and they got this national recognition. The company need to fight back. So what they did is actually, when you have a lot of money, you can afford this. You can even afford to build your own social movement with your funding that you have for the PR and for the advertising campaign. So this is what they did. They have emulated their own social movement to support the project, and they have founded NGOs, grassroots in the local community of Roșia Montană. They even founded union of workers in the mine. So they pretty much they have everything they need. But the only difference is that they have to pay for everything. But when you have a lot of money, you can even afford to build your own social movement. Social movement, I'm using quotation marks here. So some of the populist discoursive strategies that Ananda says to use are actually put forward and developed in this counter movement that this company has been building in the last years, quite successfully, I would say. So one of the discourse that they have is they are trying to demonize the green activists. They were described in terms of they are communists, they are Bolsheviks, they are hippies, very naive. They have been accused of having occult or hidden interest versus, of course, the national interest or the interest of local people. So this is one of the first things they are trying to dismiss the opposition and the environmental movement, and saying that to demonize the activists. But what he also did was try to demonize the politicians for being too weak and unwilling to decide the fate of the people who need jobs and money. So everything which is, even though there are not quotation marks, these are discourses in his. So the way that the president and this counter movement is addressing the issues. So they're saying that the community actually wants this project. They do need. They live in extreme poverty. They do need jobs, and there is the politicians for that they are willing to take the decision because they are afraid of the consequences they might have to face from the negative popular opinion. So they are also demonizing the political class for their unwillingness to take a stand and go ahead for a decision. And this is important because while the environmental movement said we need a technical decision, the counterpart and the president said the politician need to decide, even then all the legal aspects are not done yet. They just need to take responsibility and make a decision. So you can imagine that there are two kinds of discourses, one which is technical and very based on legal grounds, which is the discourse of the movement, of the social movement. On the other hand, you have this populist and politicians discourse that were just pressing the government to take a political decision and go ahead with the project. Another strategy was to demonize this cyanide hysteria, as he put it. And he actually came up, he was just promoting a message that the company came up with, which was saying that there is less cyanide that was being thrown out in the environment in these huge facility dam than there is in the morning coffee. So the message is there is cyanide in the coffee, which is of course is a lie. There is no cyanide in the coffee, so there is no problem with that. But they were trying to promote this kind of message that cyanide is actually safe for the environment, and we drink it every morning in our morning coffee. Just to demonize this cyanide hysteria, because this was one of the most important messages that got the public attention, the use of cyanide. Another discourse was the creation of workplaces. Of course, this was actually put forward with inaccurate data. There was always saying that we are going to create thousands of jobs, and this is not true. If you look at the project, the peak number of jobs created is 1,000 in the 3 or 4 years during the creation of the construction of the mine, and after that there will only be 600 for the remaining years of extraction. There will be only 600 jobs for the local, and not all of them are going to be for local communities because they are not qualified to operate the machines. And so this is another bubble of soap they are using, this discourses of jobs versus environmental preservation. Another discourse is that Roșia Montană is an environmental catastrophe, as it is now, that could be only saved by the mining project. And what he did, that actually he showed the image that I showed you from Roșia Poieni, and he said, look at the disaster in Roșia Montană. But that's not Roșia Montană, that's Roșia Poieni, and the gold mining project has nothing to do with that. It's just, they are just very close to each other. But the gold mining project is not going to solve the environmental destructions in Roșia Poieni. There is, so that's another way to speculate this environmental consciousness that the Romanians have, saying that actually the solution for the environmental problem in Roșia Montană is actually the mining project, which is kind of not true. He was also pressing the government for a quick political decision as opposed to technical evaluation through the environmental impact assessment procedure. This is what I tell you, that they were favoring a political decision versus a legal one and a technical decision that actually the movement is trying to fight for. And another discourse is that Gabriel Resources will sue Romania and ask for liabilities for not letting them start the mining project. But he never mentioned the 40 million euro that Romania still needs to pay to Hungary as liability after the cyanide spill in Baia in 2000. So a few conclusions. So what I was trying to do is to make a comparison between movement discourses along and the three aspects of justice, but also the populist counter responses to the movement. And what I'm trying to say is that populism can be a source of environment problems and conflicts, and the political ecology framework of analyzing is very useful in showing how this political perspective can actually cause environmental damage. I have also described some examples of the populist reactions to the environmental protection efforts, with the example of the populist discourses of Traian Băsescu. But I also like to show, and I'm not sure it was clear enough, that the environmental justice movement have the tools to effectively challenge the populist discourses through a complex discourse of justice that involves these three aspects of distributions, recognitions, and participation. Public participation is one of the most important ones. But as long as you speak about justice for people and not about let's preserve a pristine environment that maybe has its rights on itself, or that may not be an environmental discourse that could help or could resist from the populist attacks. But when you talk about rights and when you talk about injustice to human beings, then it's easier to counteract any populist propaganda. And then also this concept of justice can show us that this putting people into this dilemma of jobs, of choosing between jobs and their own health, the health of their families, and the safety environment is simply unjust. You cannot make them force this decision only because they are living in poverty or only because they need jobs. So these are some of the conclusions, and I have two more pictures to show you, and I'm going to close with these pictures. Here it is pictures from Cluj, one of the events that actually were made to express their solidarity with the movement in Greek. And you can see me doing participant observant research. I'm hidden behind one of the slogans there. So these are a few of the. There are others you cannot see in the picture. I have other pictures but you can see actually that we actually went for a walk during this event, because which is interesting that this movement actually has very close relationship with other environmental justice movement across the world. For example, the one in Greece, or the No TAV movement in Italy, and they actually express solidarity with each other, on several grounds. So this is my presentation, and let's close this with this image and this message of solidarity from the green activists in Cluj and Romania. Thank you.